Hello and welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial, we're gonna learn about AngularJS data binding. So now, when we say data binding, we are talking about that we move the data from the source or from the component class to our view. Now there are different ways to data bind inside AngularJS. Now, the first one is one-way binding from the data source to the view. And the syntax for this will be using this symbol, setting the target attribute, and give it the value. Now, we have also the one-way binding from the view to the data source. And its syntax is like this, where we bind an event from the view to our own data source. Finally, we have two-way data binding. Now, when we say two-way data binding, we mean that we can bind value to it from the data source or from the view. So now you will be able to see the code. If you check the description of this video, you will have the link to go to the GitHub repository for this tutorial. And also, please join our website tutorialsxl.com, where we offer an online training courses for a highly discounted price. So now, let's head back over to our tutorial. Now you will find all the examples inside the data binding component. What we want to do, we want to start off first with the one-way data binding. Now, let's head over here. Now what we want to do, we want to bind some information from the data source, right here, the component itself, to our view HTML. So let's do that. Now what I will do, I will define just a variable. Now, what we want to do, we want to have this value binded to an attribute inside our own HTML file or HTML data. So let's do that. Let's head over here. Notice with me that I have used the attribute directive, which indicate that I want to bind some data to an attribute of the element. Okay, and we will be using the title attribute. Now I'm going to run the application so we can see the results, and you're gonna notice that it's going to be one way only data binding only from my data source to the view, and my view cannot like change or do anything to this data unless like I allow it to, or I do some other way around to configure it to change. So now we will go to the data binding and we can inspect right here. Notice that I have this paragraph which we have created and we have the same value of the variable. I'm gonna just place some dummy text right here. If I hover over it, it will should show me the title, as you notice, as a tooltip for this element. So let's stop debugging. Now, what if we want this value to be changed? We need to do the following. Now let's head over here. So now we have this method that will be called and it will change the value of the attribute variable, and we're gonna see that reflection on the screen. Now remember that the only way to edit this value is from the data source, which is the component TypeScript file. So now we're gonna see another binding right now when we add the change title to the view right here. So now notice with me that I've added this button right here, and this button have a one-way binding from the element or the view to the data source. So my HTML is binded to this event. Now, can my data source change this binding? It cannot change this binding at all, since this is only a one-way binding from the view to the data source. Now notice that I'm using this click directive, which is a reserved directive for Angular, and it will bind any click to this event. So let's run our application actually, and let's see that our own button right here will change the value for the title, and we should see the reflect of the change on our own element. So now this is the element which has the test value tooltip. When I hit change title and hover again over my element, I should see the new value, and this way we have changed the value for the one-way data binding from the data source to the view. And as you notice, we need to change the data source to have the change reflected on the view. Now we want to see two-way binding. Now when we say two-way binding, that means that both sides, the data source, the view, can do modifications on the element. Now let's head over here. Let's add a new value, and I'm gonna call this value username. Now, many times you will be working with the forms, and you need to get and also sometimes set the value for a certain text box. So now what we're going to use, we are going to use the ng model two-way binding, so we can change the value from the data source and also from the view. So now I will add now we have this value, and here we're gonna add a new element. So now when I specify that I want to use the ng model, and I also provide it with two-way binding directives as here, this way Angular will understand that both sides will actually work on this element or this value. Now I need to specify the value. Now what I want to do, I want to type the value as a message. Okay, so I'm going to do adding two buttons right here. So now we have added it 3 events. The first event, or the first one, is the two-way binding from the data source to the username variable, from the view to the username variable. Also, we have the second event, which will be changing the username value from the data source, and the last one will actually read for us the title right here. We should call it like read username. Okay. Now, if we open the console, what I want to do, I wanna just type the value without anything, without adding anything. So as you can see, it's empty. Now I'm going to type some value and I'm gonna read it. And notice that as soon as I type a value to this text box, since this a two-way binding, it will detect that the value changed and type it for us. Now if we change it from the data source, I'm gonna type test right here, and I'm gonna change it from the data source. Notice that as soon as I change the value from the data source, it will be reflected on my text box right here. And if I read it in the console, it will say it changed. Now, what if I want to bind directly to text inside my view? So I don't want to add like a text input right here. To do so, we'll be using string interpolation. So let's do that. So now I have like this h4, and inside it I'm binding directly from the username. So now if I go to the screen right here, now if I type like get the data source value, it will directly be reflected here. If I type something, so it's going to be directly binded to the view. If I like read the username, notice that the value is the same one that I have typed here. So as you can see, data binding is real time via the AngularJS, and whatever you do like in Angular from the data source or from the view, it can be directly detected and also reflected. So I hope you enjoy and find this tutorial useful. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please make sure that you join us in our website and subscribe to our own mailing list. Thank you for watching.